the word Christ here. We know that he spoke to God, but did he understand the Messiah and Jesus? The book of Hebrews seems to think he did. You know, it's pretty interesting. And it says because he was looking ahead to his reward. Again, he was probably one of these great people of the Old Testament that God gave a vision of heaven to. Showed him the New Jerusalem, the city of God that was coming. And he knew what was coming for him. So he got a vision very likely got a vision from God. By faith he left Egypt, not fearing the king's anger. He persevered because he saw him who is invisible. He saw him who is invisible. By faith he kept the Passover and the sprinkling of blood, so that the destroyer of the firstborn would not touch the firstborn of Israel. I mean, have you ever seen the movie The Ten Commandments? You guys ever seen the movie? Charlton Heston, The Ten Commandments. They show the Passover, and the Jews are in their house, and all around you hear the screams. You hear the screams of the women as their babies die, as their children are dying. The amount of faith that it took to do that, to just, wow. We're supposed to basically go out on a limb and identify ourselves to Pharaoh and say, I'm an Israelite, and put blood on my door. They could have come in and killed me. But to do that in faith and then to sit there and trust that the angel of death was not coming to their house when they heard all this screaming going on all around them. I mean, that took a lot of faith, right? It took a lot of faith. But he did it. All right. By faith, the people passed through the Red Sea as on dry land. But when the Egyptians tried to do so, they were drowned. I mean, what a sight that must have been. The water just splits and there's wall. I mean, they're walking through this and they're looking and look at the water. You know,
look at the whale.
Is it going to stay?
The fishes.
Is it going to stay up there? You know, I mean, they had to walk for miles to walk through the Red Sea like that. I don't know how many miles it is, but it was miles. And the Egyptians were like, well, if they can do it, we'll do it. And it didn't work so good for them. The water came tumbling down on them, you know. So, I mean, that had to be an amazing sight. I mean, we even get amazed at waterfalls, don't we? Mm-hmm. When you see a beautiful waterfall and you just look at it, it's like, wow, that is cool. They were walking between two gigantic waterfalls. That's what they were doing. The water was just being held up by God supernaturally, but it probably was just flowing, and they're just like, oh boy, let's keep moving here. You know? Yeah, let's just keep going, you know. But that's what it was. You know, it was an amazing thing. By faith, the walls of Jericho fell after the people had marched around them for 7 days. Do you think there was anybody saying, this is stupid?
Yeah.
Why are we... Does Joshua know what he's doing? I can't believe God told him that we had it. This is dumb. But they did it. They went around 7 days. They kept walking around. And then the last day they shouted. Somebody's like, oh yeah, like us shouting is going to make a wall fall down. Right. Well, it did, didn't it? The wall came down. Yeah, I mean, we're human beings. You think there weren't a few people with big eyes and mouths gaping open? You know, they maybe kind of believed, but they never really knew for sure what was going to happen. And the walls, the Bible actually says the walls fell down flat. In other words, they kind of fell out. If they'd have fell back, it wouldn't have been flat. They had to fall out. So falling out flat meant they just had to just kind of book over those flat walls and go right into the city. And that's how it happened. And then we know from archaeology that is how it happened. They found some of the residue of the walls, and they did fall out flat. It did happen that way. This is one of those places where archaeology is kind of backed up the Bible. All right. By faith, the prostitute Rahab, because she welcomed the spies, was not killed with those who were disobedient. I mean, she was a CIA spy behind enemy lines. And she risked her life because she thought, everything I hear about this God, I better get on his side. Because everywhere these people go, this God has a tendency to defeat their enemies. I'm going to trust that this is the real God. And think about it. She had to trust that when the Israelites were coming in and killing everybody around them, that they would remember, wait a minute, not that house. They had to remember that. You know, in the midst of war, crazy things happen. You know, but she had to trust that she would be spared, and she was. She and her family were spared. Just because that red string was in the window of her house. You know? I mean, Joshua probably told them, okay, kill everybody, but don't kill the woman with the red string in her house. When guys are in there in the midst of battle, sometimes things get overlooked. You know, you get all adrenaline flowing, and she had to have a lot of faith that she was going to be spared. And she was. All right. And then it goes on, verse 32. And what more shall I say? I do not have time to tell about Gideon, Barak, not Obama, the biblical Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice, and gained what was promised, who shut the mouths of lions, quenched the fury of the flames, and escaped the edge of the sword, whose weakness was turned to strength, and who became powerful in battle, and routed foreign armies. And you know, it says their weakness was turned to strength. Think about Moses. Moses kept telling God, God, I'm not a really good public speaker. And God would like, no, you're supposed to do it. No, I got this stuttering problem, God, and I'm not, you're going to do it. No. And finally God's like, all right, where's your brother? Let's get Aaron. Aaron will do it. And that's how it worked out, right? So God used Moses' weakness. And then there's the case of Gideon. Gideon was the same way. Gideon, who am I? I'm the least of the least of the least tribe of my people. You're going to use me? No, you're going to show me a fleece. Okay, I'll give you the fleece. Well, okay, well, give me one more fleece. You know, the one day it was dry and the ground was wet. The next day it was wet and the ground was dry. And God used those people in spite of their weaknesses and their lack of faith, by the way. He used them anyway. And guess what? Everybody knew it was God, not them. Everybody knew it was God. All right? So notice so far, you get these people that have faith. If you stop right here, you would almost be able to assume if I just have faith, I'm going to be able to do all these awesome things. Nobody's going to be able to stand against me. If I have faith, Satan is going to tremble in his boots, and the kings are going to bow down to me. All the wealth of the nations is going to come my way, and I'm just going to overcome and conquer, right? If you stop right here, that's the conclusion you would get. But the Bible doesn't stop there. What does the Bible say? It said, women received back their dead, raised to life again. So far that's still pretty good there, right? Others were tortured. Whoops. Wait a minute. You said if I have enough faith. Yeah. Do you have enough faith to be tortured and not renounce him? Others were tortured and refused to be released so that they might gain a better resurrection. Some faced jeers and flogging. How about Jesus on the cross? Was there any jeers and flogging on the cross? Did Paul get whipped a few times? I think so. While others were chained and put in prison. How about Samson? He was blinded, chained, put in prison. Paul, Peter, chained, put in prison. They were stoned. Anybody in the Bible you remember that was stoned? Stephen. Paul got stoned many times, but he didn't die from stoning. But he still got stoned. They were sawed in two. Jewish tradition says this was Isaiah. Isaiah was persecuted, he was fleeing, and he found a hollow tree, and he hid in the tree, and they found him, and they sawed him in two. Isaiah. That's what happened to Isaiah. They were put to death by the sword. That's more than likely how Paul died. Paul was beheaded. They went about in sheepskins and goatskins. John the Baptist, hint, hint. destitute, persecuted, and mistreated. The world was not worthy of them. They wandered in deserts and mountains and caves and holes in the ground. How about Elijah? Elijah fleeing from Jezebel.
Or David
hiding in a cave. David hiding in a cave from Saul. But these people had faith. Look what happened. Did they win in this life? Not from a worldly point of view. And the chapter closes and it says this. These were all commended for their faith. All of them. Not just the people that had the great victories. Yet none of them received what had been promised. God had planned something better for us, so that only together with us would they be made perfect. So the saints of the Old Testament and the saints of the New Testament have a destiny, and neither one can exist without the other. We rest on their accomplishments, but guess what? They saw the future. God gave them a vision of what was coming. And because of what God was going to do through us, the church, they were able to die in faith, even if it was through torture, imprisonment, not receiving the promises that they had been promised. They waited because they were waiting for a better resurrection. So I think there's a great lesson in this chapter is that you can have all the faith in the world, and it really comes down to what is God deciding how your life is supposed to work out. How are you going to glorify God? You may not be Tim Tebow, where all the world looks and sees his faith. And even on talk radio, sports talk radio, they talk about him, every day. And usually, if you listen to sports talk radio, those are some pretty anti-God people. Those are really a bunch of animals, like these guys on talk radio. They talk about their women and getting drunk and all this stuff, but they actually have respect for Tim Tebow. It's pretty amazing to listen to it. You and I may not be famous like that. We may just struggle quietly behind the scenes all our life. And you know what? We may have a lot of bad things happen to us. And people may look at us and say, wow, there must be sin in their life. They just don't have enough faith, I don't think. Why do they have to go through all that? The Bible tells us sometimes you do go through all that. Sometimes it is hard. Sometimes God raises people up to use as an example of glory and victory in this world. Other people are seemingly defeated, and yet, if you look at them, they're not. They still walk in faith. They still say, well, I'm going to follow my God even if I don't get what I want. Because I'm looking for a better resurrection. I see him who is invisible. Amen. I walk by faith, not by sight. Even though I do not see him, I love him, as Peter put it. Even though you don't see him, you love him. And what did Jesus say to Thomas? He said, you believe because you see. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet believe. That's what we're called to do. We do have some evidence, but it's not 100%. We're walking by faith. We don't see everything now. We see through a glass darkly. So, that's what the faith walk is all about. God's going to give you just enough evidence to keep you going, but he's not going to overwhelm us. He's going to expect us to walk and trust him, even though everything doesn't necessarily look like it's going the way it should be going. We know enough about his character and that he is good, that we can just hang in there and say, I'm going to stay with him. I'm going the way he's asking me to go because he will not fail me. Amen? Amen? That's the kind of faith that's in the Bible. It isn't always one victory after another. Sometimes there's some setbacks before there's final victory. And some of us will die and the world won't even notice. But heaven notices. Heaven will notice when people have passed on. They'll know who quietly fought the good fight. And as soon as they open their eyes, we'll hear, well done, thou good and faithful servant. And guess what? Sometimes the last will be first and the first will be last. And that's how it's going to end up in the end. So just hang on to that. Most of us are nobodies in this world's eyes. Most of us are. So let's walk in faith. No matter what God has chosen, if you and I are going to be raised up to a place of prominence, or if we're just going to have a quiet walk behind the scenes, in the end, God will sort everything out. he'll say well done to who he wants to.